Mariam Mollaghaffari from Mariam Design Studio.
Mariam Grace Design.
Just so excited to have you here. It was kind of a very interesting story. I'll touch on that a little bit. Hopefully, I felt like it was my mansplaining moment, but I wanted to give some context now that you're here. What happened, we had an after-work event here at ChowNow in Culver City. And what happens is, not just at that event, but like when we come in on Saturdays to record this, people just walk in and they're just like, hey, this is a beautiful space. Maybe like a couple of months ago, somebody wanted to ask me where we got the light fixtures from. Maybe you can answer that.
Yeah.
But so that was the context. And when I saw you explaining to somebody the design, I was like, hey, you know what? This was designed by a studio in Culver City, Rap Studio, and the lead designer was that lead designer on that is Mariam. You should look it up. And then she's like, yeah, I know, I am the designer.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. It didn't feel like mansplaining.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
Awesome. So today, before we get into find out about how you designed this beautiful space, get a little bit of your background, I thought what we do is a couple of quickfire questions.
Okay.
So these are, if you can, try to answer them in one word or one sentence.
Okay.
And hopefully some of it might be controversial, but we'll dive more into it as we go through the rest of this podcast. How does that sound?
I mean, pressure's on, but I'm ready. Yeah.
All right. So the first one is, do you need to be rich to start your own design studio or business in general?
No.
Love it. Love it. Next one, true or false? People see the success or failure, but not the struggle.
I think that's true.
Yeah. And, hopefully through this conversation, people find that inspiration. Because I find so many times people either see success or failure of somebody else, but they don't see the struggle. They don't see, they see success, they don't see all the failures that led up to it. Mm-hmm. Or if they see failure, they don't see all the successes that followed.
Totally. Yeah.
And the next one is, I think this is very applicable to you.
Okay.
Is it better to specialize than be a jack of all trades?
I won't say which is better. I am a jack of all trades. I prefer that. But everyone's different.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. Great. So those were my quickfire questions. Now, I think what might be really great, talk a little bit about how you got into architecture and design. Give us a little bit of your background, some context for our viewers.
Sure. Okay. So I was born... No, I'm just kidding. I studied architecture in college after a couple years of being in college and not really knowing what I wanted to do. And I was taking random classes and really loved learning about random things. And then by way of that, ended up taking an architecture 101 course and had this kind of light bulb moment where I realized architecture is art and science and philosophy and design. It's everything in one field. And so I think architecture, actually, to answer your quickfire question about architecture, it is being a jack of all trades. I have to understand engineering to be able to do my job. And I have to understand philosophy to be able to design thoughtfully. I'm not an expert at any of those those individual things, but I understand how they work within the field of architecture.
Did you have a passion to art previously? What led you?
Yeah. So in high school, I was very artistic. I painted, did ceramics. I loved making things and tinkering, and then when it was time to pick a major, I must have floated the idea to my family. And although my dad's Iranian, he is very progressive, I would say. But there was definitely this art is not a major, that's not what we study in college.
Don't waste your money. Right?
Yeah, even he as nice as he could be, he's well, what kind of job would you get after college if you studied art? So, and even my grandpa, who was visiting from Iran, I was showing him like some of my artwork, and he was like, "This is great, but like this is a hobby." It's like, okay, got it. So yeah, I think I was
Immigrant
just
parents like
that exactly. It's just not. It doesn't
if it's not
resonate.
math or science, it's not the major.
Right. And again, like they were like they encouraged me to do art as a hobby.
As a hobby,
And
yeah.
music, like they wanted me to play piano, whatever instrument I wanted to play. They would sign me up for lessons. It was very supportive, but you know,
It's
within
nice.
limits.
It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was kind of already artistically inclined, and then yeah, I took that course and was just like, oh my gosh, everything I'm learning in philosophy applies to this, and everything like I love sketching, and now I can do that. And there's a job that like will pay me to do this, which I later learned doesn't pay well. But yeah, so that then once I decided architecture was the thing, I think I graduated it was a 4-year program that I did in 3 years. I just like loaded up and graduated, and then started working ever since. And now I'm here.
Tell us a little bit about your career journey as well.
Yeah. So there was the recession in 2008. I graduated shortly thereafter. So I wasn't in the thick of it, but architecture and the construction industry was like majorly impacted by that recession. And so a lot of architects got out of the field. So there was a massive void for architects with experience. And then a lot of firms that survived were terrified. So I think that set the tone for like very long hours for very little pay.
Sounds very familiar for today, right? Okay.
And they even prep you for that in school. Like all-nighters are a very common thing in architecture school. So yeah, I started applying for jobs, and I think after 6 months, I got an internship at a architecture firm that was owned by a really large engineering firm. And so I had kind of a smaller firm experience, but with the resources of a major company. And I learned a lot at that firm about engineering, lighting design, because it was all in-house, which is uncommon, atypical for architecture firms. And then after about a year there, I took a jump to a high design, very reputable firm in Portland. Portland, Oregon is where I grew up. And took a pay cut to work for a firm that had that reputation. And after about 3 months of being an intern there, the architect that I was working under was let go, and they were like, "You lead the project now." Oh. So it was like a sink or swim. I was working crazy hours of crying like at 2 a.m. So I'm like, the building is going to leak and it's going to be my fault. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm Googling how to waterproof, windows. I was just like in way over my head. But delivered the project, and that just felt like this crash course. It's like, oh, I'm 22 and I know how to run a project and work with contractors and engineers, and I was really lucky. I had a mentor at that firm who was she's a great designer, but she was like understood project management, so she really set this this precedent for like how to do good design and also be really organized and do it the right way, like from a paperwork perspective and legal perspective, contractual obligations and all of that. I think it's common to work for designers that let that stuff go by the wayside and they just don't care about it as much. But she just made it really important, and so that transferred to me. And then that was kind of true architecture. We're doing ground up projects, adaptive reuse, similar to this, where it's a building that exists, and then we came in and replaced the windows, knocked down walls, spruced it up to be like warehouse turned office. Did a lot of projects like that. And then And then I kind of just started feeling this disconnect between interiors and architecture, and it felt counterintuitive to what I learned in school, which was like everything should be thoughtful. And we were working a lot for real estate developer, like commercial real estate developers at that firm. And so a lot of it is about efficiency and performas and, however we can turn this around as quick as possible and make as much money as possible. So good learning. But then I was like, from a design perspective, I was like, I hate walking in, it looks beautiful from the street. And then you walk inside and you're like, what, who did the, what happened? And so then I moved to a much smaller firm. There were 5 of us, 3 of whom were the owners. I think I was the second hire. And they were architecture, interiors, and they had a furniture shop, fabrication. So I was designing furniture and then working with the fabricators directly to learn that. And I was just like, another light bulb. Like, now I'm in love. Now I know I love designing furniture. I love seeing things get made. I love prototyping. And I'm like detailing and designing the interiors of spaces, which is really what we all interact with. So that felt really important. And then I was doing residential proper architecture. So, single family residential houses, understood that scale of work, which I hadn't been exposed to yet in the professional setting. And then I was doing, wineries, coffee shops, just had a ton, like working at small project scale. I just got to do a ton of work in a short amount of time. And then because it was so small, it just felt like, all right, now what? There's nowhere to grow at a company that's 5 people. And so I had an opportunity to go back to the firm that I came from, but move to Los Angeles, and help kind of start their satellite office here. So I did that and did that for about a year before joining Wrapped, which is the studio that I worked at where we designed this space, and was at Wrapped for 5 years. And now I'm on my own. That was very long-winded. Sorry.
No, it's very, very, very engaging. I think a lot of like interesting tidbits. There's, it's like it's all building up to something, right? I mean, you talked a little bit about project management, that detail, right? When you're doing something on your own, how important is that, and how important is that to build that in early?
Yeah.
Because it's great you design the best project that you possibly can, but if you're like 6 months late, or you missed some permits.
Totally. Well, I think it's something, even when I was like leading design teams and mentoring junior staff, it was like I would try and express the importance, because I've seen it work where you retain clients that way. Clients trust you when you deliver things on time, you do what you say you're going to do, you're careful with their money, it feels like it is disrespectful and kind of like reckless to be spending on something that you think is important, but the client doesn't think is important, and unless you're bringing them along and like making sure that they understand why these things are important and why it's worth the money, you can't just like design as if it's your own pocketbook. I don't know. And the management side of it too. I mean, again, architecture I think that's what separates it from art, is at the end of the day, we have to deliver something that stands. Yeah. And there's a lot of potential legal ramifications. It's very contractual. Like, it is like scary when you read those contracts. Yeah. You have to be on top of it. And I think I've worked for both types of people where they didn't really care, and it was, then there are potential lawsuits, and it's like, well, I don't want that,
So this project, the ChowNow HQ project, like you mentioned, some clients who didn't care.
Right.
I'm guessing this is one where your client did care.
Yes. Chris was very, very involved, but also incredibly trusting. He is, I'm not just saying this. Chris is a great client. he cares about design, which is always what you want as a designer, and was open to ideas. Also had ideas on his own, but wasn't like, he understood that if it wasn't the right idea, he could accept that too. And even like think like the tile in the kitchen. We tried to, you know, save costs in the project and go with a different tile, but then as we're mocking it up, it just really wasn't working, and the grout lines weren't lining up, and it was a lot. It was more money and more time to go with the tile that's in there now, and he got it and was just like, I think it's important. I think we should do it. And I was like, yes. Like, and that's really what makes this. I think the tile is like an absolute.
I want to hear this story more.
Okay.
About like how you were leading this project, HQ ChowNow. What is the story behind, like, what was the not request, but the main thing that the client wants, right?
Yeah.
Chris wants, and how did you approach to that?
Yeah. So at Wrapped is an interdisciplinary studio, which I learned a lot from, you know, early on. They start every project asking questions. And so Chris had approached us, I think via the broker. That's how we got the connection. And it was mid-pandemic when we started the project. And I think Chris was really forward thinking. He was like, when this is over, I want a space that embodies our culture, that makes people feel like they belong. So he had a lot. It was very people driven, and he wanted his teams to want to be here. So that was a main driver. And in order to do that, we interviewed not only Chris, but a handful of different department leads, took a lot of notes, kind of outlined what we were learning from the team members themselves, how people worked. A lot of this space was designed around, you know, we didn't really assign exact spaces for people, but we wanted the customer service team is really loud. They're on the phone, they're like celebrating wins, and then the engineers are like, do not do that near us, you know? And so that was an intentional separation. This building's shaped like an L, and we you know, strategically pulled those teams apart, but we wanted where the L kind of intersects, that to be for there to be a reason that customer service people would interact with engineers, even though they're on opposite sides of the space. And so also because of what ChowNow is and what you guys do, there's this emphasis on food. We leaned into a lot of hospitality spaces it doesn't feel like an office when you're here. It feels like, yeah.
I can feel definitely hospitality here.
Yeah, and that was intentional. We wanted it to feel like there was a connection between your clientele at ChowNow, the types of people that you
It
work
feels
with.
like in a coffee shop, like, you know,
Yeah.
Chilling right here in a courtyard in a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of it too is because of the building that already existed.
Right.
You know, let's take advantage of the garage doors that open up onto this patio space, and we're in LA, so why not use the outdoor space as an extension of the interior? So there was a lot of this building presented us with opportunities. The way you guys worked presented us with opportunities, and then the culture of food and how important sharing a meal is, and that was something even at your previous office, which I don't know if either of you had worked at.
I worked out of the Ply Vista office.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was everyone we talked to said their favorite thing was having lunch together, and so that was like absolute priority for this space. Is like we have to keep that.
Totally. And as soon as you entered, like I even remember first time I came in for my interview, you entered, like the thing you noticed first is this long dining table. Mm-hmm. And that's where, so rustic, but also so welcoming.
Yeah.
That's where everybody, you would have your lunch, you would make some friendships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was important to Chris too, because I think, as CEO, he's like, I don't want to feel disconnected from people. So he sits at the table at lunch with everyone, and he doesn't want there to be this like, like, oh, it's the CEO,
It's
like,
a CEO's table.
yeah.
He's super accessible. One thing I don't think I've ever said it to Chris directly, but I just tell it to my coworkers when they find out like I commute here from Burbank. So if you're in LA, that's like
Far.
it might as well be like, another state. But I love coming in here, and I always say this. I say like, hey, if Chris ever wants me to stop coming to the office, he's going to need a restraining order.
That's
Because I
great.
love coming to this space. It's such
Yeah.
a, as much as I like being in my house, I need to get out. And when I come here, it just makes it all worth it.
Yeah, totally. And it doesn't hurt that he caters meals throughout the week,
Oh yeah, we're so spoiled. I don't know if you know the latest, but Tuesdays and Thursdays we have Chef Tam. We have a chef come in,
Oh my
prepare
gosh.
breakfast for us.
When?
Tuesdays and Thursdays, come on
Tuesday.
down. You two are always welcome. And then Wednesdays we have a catered lunch. Sometimes we have, we've had Ronan a few times. Such a great, my favorite pizza place in LA right now.
Yeah, so good.
And they'll come in here, make pizzas fresh, and with me, some of my, being picky or my dietary restrictions, they're always so
Yeah, you
accommodating.
even have a pizza oven here.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That was another thing that Chris was very like, he wanted pizza ovens. He really wanted this to be a space for gathering. Super important. And I mean, yeah, the design really, like once you have all those pieces in place, the design just kind of comes, at least for me, it just kind of, the right answer shows up. Sometimes it takes a little longer, but a lot of times it's like if you do the proper strategizing and thinking and understand the priorities, and like even the color palette here was like derived from food. Like I was like, oh, it would be nice to have this kitchen, the main kitchen, inspired by spices. So like paprika and whatever. It's very warm, inviting, and then the other one is more like sage, basil, and that was intentional. And again, it's not something that everyone needs to know or may not pick up on when they enter the space, but as a designer to have guidelines that course correct you. So it's important for me as a designer to not be subjective, because then what do you do? Anyone could say, well, I don't like that, or I do like this. So I just make sure that everything has a reason. And then that way, when you get questioned, like, why is this the way it is? There's a thoughtful response to that. And it's not just like, because I said so, because I'm a designer,
Yeah, and this is super fascinating because I always thought that part of the world just worked. Hey, you come in, you say what you want, you get some mock-ups, you say approve or disapprove, like this, like interviewing, finding out what and especially in this case, finding out what your customers want, presenting with that thoughtful plan, and then, but that's just the beginning of it. Then it's the execution.
Yeah, the execution's a whole. That's the thing too with architecture. It's like the first part of the project is very creative, very like philosophical, and strategizing, and it just involves a lot of different things. And then it's like, well, rubber to the road. Like now we have to get this engineered. Now we have to make sure we can build it. Now we have to make sure we can find the right people to do it in the right amount of time for the right amount of money. Like it's all of a sudden you have to turn your brain from like, this flowery sort of very creative, high in the sky, like mindset to like go time. And I like pivoting between the two. And I think the stresses early on in my career of like being way too young and trying to figure it out on my own was like terrifying and probably traumatic, but it set me up where like now I'm like, oh, I love working with contractors. I love this space too. We actually had an architect of record, just Erico and Moss. They're down the street. They designed the building itself, and I remember the designer on their side, who I was working with to, work with the contractor on this project. He and I were up till like 10 o'clock on a Friday one night, just like detailing out the framing for that island to make sure that all the tiles would fit because it's framing and then it's substrate and then it's grout and then it's tile, but we didn't want to cut any tiles, which is a really hard thing to execute. But we both cared about, we're like, no, we have to do this right. And it was really refreshing to work with someone that like understood the importance of that.
How long was how long it took to build this project?
That's a great question. I think probably start to finish a year.
A year.
I think from like the first meeting with Chris, I think it took about a year. I think construction was delayed. So I want to say it should have been like 3 months, and it was probably closer to 6. There's still things I'm sure Chris wants fixed, you know, but yeah, I think it was about a year from start to finish.
It's a work in progress, but I'm sure he appreciated that all those tiles lined up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was another. Even selecting the furniture. I mean, Chris was very like, I don't want to see cords. I want it to be like seamless. So that again, all part of the process is like finding a table that fits the design aesthetic, that also has the capability to run cords down the leg, that, you know, has everything integrated. It's a lot of, you know, coordination. The design is one thing, and then coordination is like very much a real part of the job.
Yeah. Now I think moving on to the next part of it, like the more great insights though, by the way, on like the overall design process, you know, your thought process, how you got into this. Next topic, which is like really, really interesting, and I think our viewers are going to find it super interesting, is, you know, when I ran into you, you told me that you've launched your own design studio.
Mm-hmm.
That seems scary, to say the least, right?
Yeah.
Outside looking in, right? Maybe especially for junior people that might look up to you. What was that like? Like, how? I'm guessing it was a long time coming, but what was that like?
Yeah, it is scary. I mean, I joke that like when I first I was like, oh yeah, I'm just oscillating between panic and excitement every day. Like that's just that's my existence now. Probably still is. I do think it was a long time coming. I think having experience being a jack of all trades really gave me confidence, because I'm like, I know I can write proposals. I know I understand contracts. I know I can work with contractors. I know I can design. I know I can do furniture. I know I can do graphic. It was like all these years of learning skill sets that made me feel like comfortable to do all of it without help. And there's something nice about working for a firm, one, for consistent paycheck, of course, benefits, all of that. But then there's this like, I don't know, drive to do more and like challenge. For me, I like being challenged. I think I was just feeling very complacent and like, man, every project, of course, is different and presents a different set of minor challenges. But all in all, like, I know what I'm doing. I know I can deliver. And like, it's nice to work at a firm because if something came up that I didn't know how to navigate, I could have someone to go to. But I also have a huge network of friends and peers and mentors that I've worked with for years that I could go to if I needed support. So yeah, it just felt like time was right. And I had, for the last year, decreased my hours at the studio, and had already been picking up new clients and doing projects on my own in the remaining time during the week.
Tell me this part. How did you get your very first client?
Well, over the years, I've had a handful of different clients, but last year, it's networking. You know, I met one of my previous colleagues, had a best friend that he went to school with who was moving to LA that was interested in working at a firm, and he suggested I talk to him. I decided to talk to him, gave him advice, and connected him with a few people in town. And then his wife is a landscape designer. She was doing landscaping for this client in the Bay Area, and that client ended up buying a second home, needed to be renovated. Landscape designer doesn't do architecture. remembered me because I had talked to her husband, and all of a sudden I have a job. So
That's how it works.
yeah, really felt serendipitous, and I feel grateful to have had that opportunity. And it's we've redone that house. Kitchen is under construction right now. It'll be done hopefully before Thanksgiving, and then it may turn into an ADU in the backyard, a guest house. It's a large property, so it's just like kind of continued to grow as a project, which has been great. And then a couple other projects were like a friend was, or a former colleague had a friend who wanted to open a tea shop and suggested that I meet with them, and all of a sudden that's another project. So I'm doing a tea shop and a house, and I'm doing branding work. I don't know. I like having the variety.
That's amazing. So it's very important, the networking.
Yes.
Especially, I guess, I think it's everywhere. Like it doesn't really matter. I think this is number one resource like that you will get the clients.
I think so. I mean, even that, like, just got a card earlier from us. It's like, I like meeting people too. I'm an outgoing person. And I think I've always tried, I remember really appreciating when I was junior, the people would talk to me. And so I try to always like invite people to ask me questions. And I still use networking as a resource all the time. So yeah, I think that's a huge part of it.
So when was this moment when you decided, okay, now I feel that I can go by my own?
I mean, I felt like I could for a long time. I think the getting the motivation to really do it was sort of twofold. I think I was feeling definitely like mildly disgruntled. So that can be a motivator. And then I was talking to one of my friends who owns a company, a business in Portland. It's called Mulberry Smoothies. They do like acai bowls and smoothies, and he's been doing that for 10 years. And when I met him, we worked at a coffee shop together, and his business has taken off, and he's one of my dearest friends. And I was like, he's heard me talk about this for years, where I'm just like, I think I should go. I don't know. And then he was like, man, what are you like? He's like, do you have friends that have gone on their own? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, have any of them failed? And I was like, no. And then he was like, okay. And he's like, do you think they're in any way smarter than you, more capable than you, or anything? And I was like, no. And he's like, what are you scared of? Like,
Yeah.
Just do it. And if it doesn't work, fine. But like, there's nothing to be scared of. And I was like, well, when you put it that way, yeah, okay, that feels right. And so that was kind of this like kick in the ass that I needed, I feel like, to just what am I scared of? I don't know. I'm not gonna, I know myself well enough to know that if I need to pivot, I will pivot, Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was kind of the moment.
You mentioned in the beginning that the pay for designers was not good, or like.
Yeah.
This is interesting because what advice would you give yourself back 11 years or 10 years?
Yeah. It's weird. So architecture is this weird, it sounds impressive to say you're an architect. Like it's up there with, engineering, doctors.
I'm thinking Seinfeld here.
Right.
Vendelay Industries.
Yes, exactly. And even, like coming from immigrant families, I feel like the options are doctor, engineer, architect. Like that's what they want you to be. And
the other, sorry to cut you off. The other interesting thing is like, I remember, I mean, I didn't go to school for architecture, but I remember some of the smartest people, some of the hardest programs to get into within a university is their architect programs, like way more difficult than like computer science or, even pre-med. And so
totally,
where's that? Like, I think that's the question. Like, where's the disconnect between that, some of our brightest folks going into architecture and design, and then on the other side, their first job is.
Yeah, it's really wild. I don't know. I don't really know if it was different pre-recession, pre-2008. I don't think it was. I think it's always been kind of a overworked, underpaid industry. But I mean, the history of architecture is weird. Architecture was not, it's a new profession, and it was rich white men that had family money that allowed them to not be builders and not be engineers and just like be creative, you know? And so money was never like big name architects that we've all heard of, like Frank Lloyd Wright, whatever. They all came from family money. That's how they were able to do their first project. That's how they became famous. And I think there's just, that might be the disconnect. So there's like the star architects that everyone's heard of, and then there's the rest of us. And
so those folks, they already didn't care about money,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
it
was passion. It's a passion profession. You do it because you care about it, and they teach you that in school. Like, you don't sleep, and you. I mean, there was one point where my parents were like, do you have a drug problem? Because I'm like, was, up all night. I'm like missing, like, oh, can't come to the house this weekend, and I'm like, no, I'm just working. I'm literally working 7 days a week, all hours of the night. Why? It's not money, it's because I care about what I do. And they kind of train you that way in school, to just like, you have to care so deeply. And I do think it makes you a really good designer. But yeah, when you're like, well, I guess I don't know how I'm going to buy a house, or, like, you start thinking about those things differently. And that's just the cult. It's this, I do think it's starting to shift. I think even now, working with more junior designers, people are like, no, I'm not working past 5. What do you mean? And then I'm like, well, I had to. You have to like fight this, like, this urge to perpetuate this horrible culture.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. Now I'm like, you should ask for more money, and no, you shouldn't work past 5. Like, I don't know why I was indoctrinated into this field that made us think like that's the right way to do it, and if you didn't do it that way, you weren't good.
This shift mentality, I think it's became all over the place, because previously it was not only architecture, but in general, I think in American culture, right? Like, work hard. You have to, like, ground, like, nobody cares after hours, like, weekends, Sundays, work is first. But I mentioned that it's shifted, like, for the last 10 years dramatically. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Dude, like, 5 o'clock, I'm closing my laptop.
Right. And then it's weird when you're the type of person that, like, I still work all hours of the day, but now it doesn't feel bad because it's for myself. But you see people leaving early, and then you're like, now I have to do your work. Like, what? And it like builds this resentment. And I think I just hit a point where I was like, well, I'm not going to, I used to pick up other people's slack if they weren't working as hard as me. And now I'm like, I did my part. Like, that's all I could do.
I think part of that shift has to be being more efficient. I remember, one of, a million years ago, but I remember when I was an engineer at Yahoo, right? I used to work like really late, but I was also very inefficient with my time. I'm working, I would find time to go out to lunch with my coworkers, do a lot of things. And then obviously when was quiet time? Quiet time was after 8 p.m. So 8 to 11, you're working. And I feel like that has to be that combination. I think,
totally.
I mean, unlike you, I was inefficient. And now I feel like if I can be more efficient, or if somebody is, maybe I'm still inefficient, but if somebody's efficient, I think they can get their stuff done in 6 to 8 hours a day. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Right? Especially, like, I feel like at ChowNow, like, my mind, the mindset here, the culture here is kind of like that, right? Hey, work hard, get your stuff done, but you know what? On the weekend, you can go do podcasting and not have to be, writing up a report or something.
Totally. I think that's really true. And that was part of how I was able to pitch the shift to part-time at my previous studio, because I was like, listen, like, I can do a full-time, I can do 40 hours of work a week in 3 days. I know I can. Like, believe me, you know? And you just, you, with the right amount of experience and efficiency, it's like shifting to, I think, task-based work mindset as opposed to time-based is where I think the workforce needs to go, because there was times where I'm like, well, I'm done with everything. And then I'm like, does anyone need help with anything? And I'm like, why? I'm done. I did my part, you know, like I'm doing 3 people's jobs now when just because it's not 5 yet, you know? So, or you do the opposite and you try to stretch out your work and intentionally become inefficient to fill up the clock, which is like, what a waste of life, you know?
You know, it's something we were talking about right before, you know, whether it's changing jobs or starting something on your own. I feel I talk to a lot of people where they have these ideas, but they feel very comfortable at their current job. They're like, you know what? I'm just going to slow down here. I'm going to wait for things to, but my 2 cents, it's hard to change habits. It's hard to turn it around, right? If you're used to, you know, extending your the time, is how are you going to turn it around for your next job?
Yeah.
Or even in the interviewing process, or when you launch your own business, how are you going to now go from this, you know, 40 hours, I'm going to take my time, to, well, I need to work 80 hours and I need to work really hard to launch my business.
Yeah.
Once I do that, I can go back to something better. I think that's sometimes I just feel like people miss that part. And I think, you know, looking at your experience, that's so important, you know, having that desire, I think desire and that habit.
Yeah.
Both are really important.
I think that's a good point, because even when I shifted to part-time, I was worried that, like, I didn't want to get used to only working part-time. So I filled I was joking earlier, the other 4 days of the week, which is not really a joke. It's true. I still work 7 days a week. But I was like, I'm not going to just coast. And also I don't enjoy that. I think I like having a sense of purpose. And now that I'm on my own, you take the part-time job away, and now I'm working full-time, but it doesn't feel like it. Even for a while I was like, man, I'm like slow, and then I'm looking at the clock, I'm like, I'm still working all day every day, but it feels slow because compared to the 80-hour weeks I was putting in before, now it's normalized, and now I feel like I have a really good balance of like knowing when to put the laptop away. But it also sometimes, especially in creative industries, it's like sometimes inspiration hits at 11 and I'm up until 2, and I'm enjoying it. It doesn't feel like a bad thing. It doesn't feel like it's being mandated. It's like, oh no, this is the time that ideas are flowing, and that's fine. Make up for it elsewhere.
Speaking of balancing, so now you're on your own. Do you hire other contractors, or like how much time do you allocate as well, like for business development, like finding new clients?
Yeah. Great question. Still working on it. I'm experimenting now with, before, when I first officially was, full-time on my own, was kind of like fitting in business development and administrative stuff when I wasn't working on project-related things. And it just kind of worked out that way. Like, I was still getting it all done. Now I think I need to be more rigid, like clear out a day a week, and just, that's my administrative BD day.
Let's be clear. Administrative thing, I think you should outsource this thing as much as you
can. Yeah.
But business development, this is definitely something that everybody who is involved in business, they should do.
Totally. Right. And I think I'm just, giving myself some space to figure out, because even the administrative stuff, because I don't have employees, it's really invoicing. And I've got a software, it's easy to do that. It doesn't take up too much time. But I agree. That's the first thing, makes so much sense to outsource. And then in terms of contractors, architecture is weird too, because, you know, last week I was getting a lot of referrals, and it was like, oh my God, if all these projects come, I'm not going to be able to do them all on my own. And if none of them come, I'm broke. So it's this weird balance, and I don't really want to employ anybody. I have this, you know, kind of fantasy of just having a network of other freelancers and contractors that have different skill sets that I can tap when needed, and we all get paid what we want to get paid. We all trust each other to do each other's work, or to do our own work. And so, yeah, when I was like kind of mentally preparing for this big rush, I immediately reached out to some freelance friends, and it's like, hey, this is happening. Would you be interested? Got like people on board, and that's just how that'll go. Yeah, super proactive. I think that's a trap that a lot of firms that I've worked for, I've just witnessed these incredibly talented designers that don't understand business.
Yeah.
And because they're incredibly talented designers and very creative, they don't want to work for anyone else because they want to do their own vision. But then they get into the world of running a business, and it is a lot. You have to do stuff that we're not trained to do.
Yeah. Hustling.
Yeah. And I think outsource, like I mentioned to you guys, I think off air, like I engaged with a business coach because I don't have an education in business. You know, my dad's an entrepreneur, so I've kind of witnessed things like that from the sideline. But yeah, I think it's a really important step to not overlook the importance of, like, you know, yeah, you can do it all, but should you do it all?
Yeah.
So
Totally. And going back to my question, 10 years ago, what advice you would give to yourself?
It's funny. I was just visiting my parents, and my brother and I were having the same conversation. I don't know that I would change how I've done things. I think I've acted largely on instinct and maybe a little bit of impulse. But yeah, I mean, I guess if anything, maybe start your own thing sooner would probably be my advice. But I also feel like I just do things when I'm ready, you know? And I think if I had done it without the confidence or the experience that I have now, maybe it would have worked, maybe it wouldn't have. Probably would have been more stressful. I think right now I just feel like it feels right. Yeah, I'm not, you know, again, the joke of panic and excitement, but generally I feel very like
Panic
ready.
and excitement is a normal state of any entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh shit, you know.
Totally. So I just kind of feel like I'm just riding it, and I don't feel overwhelmed. I think that's I think had I done it sooner, maybe I would have felt overwhelmed, maybe not, but yeah, even like, I mean, you know, buying a house, like my dad, when I was like 15, was like, buy a house. I'm like, with what? Like, how could I possibly do it? So he would have loved if I bought a house much sooner, and I ended up doing it when I was 30, and I was like, okay, well, I did it in my own time, and now I'm ready, and I'm not overwhelmed, and I have the means, and, you know, whatever. I don't know. I just feel like I do things when I'm ready, and who knows, there's no rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know that I have major advice. Maybe ask for more money more. Like negotiate better. Yeah. I think that was, although I also think because I kind of jumped firms a lot, that helped. I think generally speaking, the industry pays not great, but I feel good about what I made in my architectural career at firms. So I don't know. Yeah. Seemed to work out.
One interesting, we didn't get a chance to touch on it. What would your advice be to somebody who wants to get into design and architecture? You went through a more, perhaps a more traditional route in the beginning, and then obviously the hustle got in there. What would you say to somebody who's starting out today, like they're interested? Should they go to a college? Should they go something else?
Yeah, I mean, college is great. my education in architecture was really valuable in learning how to design. But when I was hand drafting in school. Other people were using software. I wasn't. And it wasn't a requirement. Maybe it is now, but I graduated knowing absolutely nothing about how to actually execute a project.
Right.
And so school is really valuable to like set, I think, the foundation for design thinking. But yeah, I mean, I lied on my first resume. I was Googling how to, yeah, I was like Googling how to learn, different softwares on the job. Most of my experience has been nothing that I could have learned out of a book. Even I got licensed as an architect in California. You have to take 8 exams and, thousands of hours of supervised experience logged. And even that, because I had already been working for 5 years before I got licensed, I was like, this book is bullshit. Like, none of this is actually applicable to the field. Like, so it was probably harder to get licensed with experience, like to pass the tests. Because I'm like, well, what I would actually do is not what this textbook says. So it's a weird field. Sorry, I'm talking too much. The advice I would give is just to be, I think, realistic about or make sure you understand what the job actually is. Yeah. I think you graduate school thinking you're going to be designing skyscrapers, and you're not. You're going to be drawing ADA compliant bathrooms. It's a very different, the reality check of working at a firm is completely, because in school we had autonomy. Everything was theoretical. You could design a building without ever talking to a structural engineer. And yeah, I don't know. I think that the reality of what the job actually is helpful. And if it's what you want to do, then do it. I used to, for a long time, I would be like, just don't do it. Like, my advice is pick another career. But
it's something we have talked a lot. So, not going to take a huge tangent, but I think realizing those things are really important, right? It seems, I remember my experience, and I see other people. My sister, her name is also Mariam. Mm-hmm. She went to school, very similar, right? First generation parents. She went to school for creative design.
Okay.
And, she had this idea in her head that, I'll pick a major and everything else will get taken care of from there. It will all work out. And it didn't. The jobs that she was getting wasn't things she was interested in. Mm-hmm. So she went a different direction. She went back, got her master's in counseling. Now she's focused on that. And I think it's that journey. Sometimes you just have to go through it, no matter how much advice you might get.
Totally.
But what you get sometimes you get from universities, theoretical, right? You can't just rely on that. You have to hustle. And other times sometimes you just have to switch it completely up.
Yeah.
Actually, different question. Can you become a designer or architect without a school?
I'm sure people do. So, this is a little kind of technical, but to become a licensed, you're technically not legally allowed to call yourself an architect unless you are licensed. And licensure is state dependent. Mm-hmm. So each state has different requirements. Some states require a professional degree, which I don't have. I have a Bachelor of Science in Architecture. I would not have been able to get licensed in Oregon. Now that I'm licensed in California, I can get reciprocity with my license, but California allowed you to get licensed with, experience letters of, referral letters, and you didn't have to have a 5-year or a master's degree. So, and that was intentional. Most of my friends got professional degrees, and I specifically revolted against that idea. I was like, why would I go back to school to get a master's in something that I just studied? Like, if anything, I would get a business, like an MBA, to counter what I already know. So no shade to people who got their master's degree, but if I did do that, my advice would have been to myself not to do that. So I think some states you can't. Like I think in Colorado, I think they allow you to get licensed with the right amount of experience, even with a high school degree. Certainly not most of the states.
But you can also start a studio, your own, and hire person with a license, can you?
You can, yeah. You can be an architectural designer. You can't call yourself an architect. You can't call yourself an architecture firm unless 2/3 of the ownership is by a licensed architect.
Interesting.
And you can practice, like I was practicing on my own architectural projects without being licensed. But then you have limitations in scale. So for example, I think I don't know exactly California's, but I remember Oregon's was less than a building that was less than 20 feet tall and less than 4,000 square feet. You don't have to be a licensed architect to do, like they won't require a stamp. But then single family residences generally you can do without a license, but you will need some like a structural engineer's stamp or something to show that it's not going to fall over, you know.
What is your specialty like? What primarily you do?
Right now, there's not really one thing. Right now I want to be doing smaller. I'm doing projects that I want to do, which is smaller. So whether it's a commercial retail space or a house, a lot of accessory dwelling units are the new thing in LA to increase density. So those are kind of fun. I just like doing small projects. I like doing interiors, but my design studio is multidisciplinary. So I do architecture, interiors, furniture design, branding, graphic design, furniture procurement. Anything that I know how to do, I'm willing to do. Which is an interesting, I think half of my job now too in meeting new clients is educating them on what an architect actually does, and what I do as an architect. I think a lot of architects will do, they'll get you a permit. But I design holistically. I like thinking about all of the different elements. Like for a project in Sonoma, I was designing and naming signage for designing signage and coming up with the name and a logo for the art studio in the backyard. I like thinking through every detail. So those are the types of projects that I enjoy doing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How people can find you? We'll put your link in our
yeah, put your link down there. MariamGraceDesign.com is my website. At Mariam Grace Design is my Instagram. And I'm available. My email's on those things. So yeah.